Welcome to the Meta, Season 24, End of Season. I'm Kin, and we have no camera for this particular episode as I'm currently traveling and don't have my camera with me. So, what is this show? Basically, we look at the state of the competitive GAC meta once, or well, at this point it's about twice per season. This is the fourth episode, I believe. I give my thoughts on where it is now, what's going to happen in the future, what's happening now, what's happened in the past season, trends, statistics, etc. Who am I? I'm a 9.5 now, a million GP player, around 4,000 skill, 4,100 currently, but I think 4,000 after the most recent squish at the beginning of the join period for season 25. Anyway, top 50-ish in the past GAC and so far around that in the new GAC. But for this particular show, what's actually more important, what's more applicable, is the amount of GAC fights I watch. Mostly for the counters tool, GrandArenaScience.com. But really that's just because I love GAC and I find it very educational to watch other people play and make mistakes so I can learn from them. So I watch a lot of that, and a lot of my analysis is based upon what I watch and what I do in my own GAC and what I encounter as well. So let's take a look at where the meta is right now after season 24, the sort of weird last season. There was potentially up to three bonus, up to two. There was 11 or 13 fights in total instead of 12 because of the week number 3 that got canceled halfway. But theoretically, you could have played 15 total matches if you had played the extra 2 weeks, but you only had an hour for each one during the cancellation day. So it was an interesting one where there was almost, season 24 was almost 2 seasons. And quite a few people, myself included, did some interesting testing against their opponents because defenses were just auto set from week 1. Not auto set, but copied the previous week's setting. So it was a chance to try some interesting attacks that we may not have normally tried if the score had actually stayed there. But besides that, there was a sort of break in the middle where a lot of people adjusted their defenses just like they would normally in between 2 seasons, like between season 24 and now we have the beginning of, between season 23 and now we have the beginning of season 24. That was an interesting approach to this last season, and I think it made for a better last 2 weeks of the season because a lot of people had defenses that they normally wouldn't otherwise have the time to create in the middle of a season. So what's happening? Starkiller is one of the best GLs if you have the Omicrons. It's amazing. Obviously, he's much more popular now that he's farmable, as I put here in the notes. There's 500 battles in season 23, and in season 24 there's almost 5,000. So an enormous growth, and along with Starkiller himself comes all of his marquees, and all of those marquees are fantastic, even if they're not relic. If they're relic, they're better, but even without the relics, they're excellent. I think Starkiller will become more and more popular and flexible on both offense and defense. I think primarily now, for many people, he's a defensive team because he's very difficult to beat depending on his comp. Like there's sort of 2 ways, non-GL options to use, either the General Grievous option or the CLS option, but it really depends on what comp you put him in. So there's a lot of flexibility on offense if you're prepared for Starkiller, or power on defense if you know your opponent is not going to scout you very well or plan very well. Iden Versio is fantastic. It's crazy. She actually has a better hold rate than half of the GLs. And Starkiller has a better hold rate than her. So she has a better hold rate than 2/3 of the GLs in season 24. Her hold rate's 20. Let's see if we can see the summary here. Top leaders on defense. Let's see, attack. These are squads. Sorry, I wanted to see leaders on defense. don't sleep on Sith Eternal Emperor. He's very hard to beat now, especially with like the DR or Treya trio. Um, but Iden is number 5 in defensive holds, and the Starkiller, the EP Starkiller team, is number 2. Non-GLs, Sith Eternal, an old GL. He's not even one of the Lord Vader or Jedi Master Kenobi GLs. Has a higher hold rate than anybody else. It's an incredible meta that we have right now. So much flexibility. But talking about Iden a little bit, there's a few interesting counters to Iden that most people aren't aware of yet. Beskar Mando is the easiest, like basically no RNG and high banners. So I think in Season 25, you'll see less and less Iden on defense unless your opponent, or again, this goes to the flexibility point that I'll talk about later on in terms of playstyles, but if you are doing some bare minimum scouting of your opponents and see what they place, you'll know whether you want to keep Beskar Mando for offense or whether you're placing him on defense. And if your opponent always places Iden, it's easy to keep the Beskar Mando team and guarantee that you can use a relatively low value team. Not low value, but while Bam is flexible, you can easily put him on offense to counter Iden for 63, 64, 65 banners with almost no RNG involved. Like it's a no-brainer type of move. So that'll be interesting in Season 25 to see what people do with Iden. And it sort of ties into this whole concept of non-GL counters. Like none of these are particularly new, but people are, again, becoming more aware of them. I think less so than I think they should be, because most of the streamers, or the popular streamers, I guess, I mean, sort of looking at Arnold here primarily, and even Xerath to some extent, they play this defensive heavy playstyle that doesn't really show off what the tippity-top competitive scene is like. And we'll see that when we look at the shift in top 50, top 25 players. You know, in Season 23, it was a lot of just defensive heavy players who depended on the initial placement of all the top, or all of the ranks, really. Leagues and divisions were based on GP. So many of the high GP players are not really motivated to play or spend a lot of time with GAC. So the defensive playstyle just beat these players easily because they don't really care so much. But now in Season 24, when you have the highly motivated players, or the highly focused players on GAC, the defensive playstyle is just, they're dropping like rocks. It's crazy to be good at to be highly ranked at GAC. Not saying that's necessarily good, but to get a high rank, which frankly doesn't have that much of a value besides bragging rights. Like, the important part's to be in Kyber 1. Who cares whether you're ranked 3000 or 3? You get the same crystals, you know? That's primarily, the high ranks at least, are primarily now going, more than half of the players are going, or are represented by highly offensive focused players, because that's how you make more points. It's easy to beat a defensive player if you score more points than they do, and just keep more of your GLs for offense, and you can beat any player who places a strong defense as long as you know how to play the offensive game. I'm ranting a little bit here, but that goes into the non-GL counters for GLs, and there's a lot of those. Very few good banners, but there's quite a few options that are very reliable, repeatable, but just not seen by a lot of the content creators. They plan on 2 shots or something like that, which is terrible for banners. 2 shots, a planned 2-shot strategy is going to get you maybe to the top 1,000 or something, but not, maybe even the top 500, but not much beyond that. Anyway, all that to say, it's a fascinating meta we have right now. You have a huge amount of options, more so than ever in SWGOH history, SWGOH GAC history. It's a golden age, in my opinion, in terms of flexibility and possibilities if you have the time to spend on trying to plan out a good offense and defense. And we haven't even gotten to the ship section. We now have the 2 new tanks for First Order and Resistance. And I think we're going to have further changes to ships in GAC. That's my opinion, not anything announced. It's just an incredible meta for GAC. So much fun. From my perspective, it's so much fun. So let's talk a little bit about playstyles. I cannot spell, apparently. Playstyles and teams, I want to look at both. But in the last season, season 24, I was trying to watch a bit more of the streamers, the Twitch streamers for GAC. Still difficult for me schedule-wise, but I think it's interesting because it represents what a lot of the, I don't know, top 1,000 or something players try to emulate because they see streamers or content creators do it. And there's a lot more streamers now that are active with a high audience than there are YouTube content creators. But it's interesting seeing their play styles and what is actually like the reality of the top 25 or top 50 or something in Kyber 1 or Kyber 2 or Kyber 3 or 4 or whatever. And it's interesting the influence they have on what people, competitive people, try and play, when in reality, what streamers play, not all streamers by any stretch of the imagination, or not all content creators, but oftentimes what content creators are focused on is interesting, engaging content, not necessarily being, you know, the top 100 or top 10 or top whatever. They want to engage their community and do things that their community finds entertaining and will gain them more subscribers or subscriptions, donations, etc., which usually relates to watch time. There's some exceptions, obviously, and I'm not saying anything about content creators being good or bad players, like they're running a business more so than trying to do really good at GAC, and that's more important to them for sure. But it's interesting how that relates to how play styles change with the meta, because content creators have a big influence on the meta because they make things public. I mean, I wouldn't have GrandArenaScience.com if it wasn't for content creators and being able to share what they discover and just choose to record for the benefit of the community. So there's no shade being thrown here, but it's interesting to see how the reality of what makes a top player versus what people try and emulate from content creators in terms of placing in the top positions. So from you, the reader, viewer, listener perspective, try and look at the GAC histories of the top 10, 20, 50 players and look at how they play playstyle wise. I think it's for me at least, it's very educational. Or look at the top players in your guild, maybe, depending on which guild you're in, and see how they play. And compare that to what you see from the content creator side of things. And I think you'll oftentimes get a little bit of it's a good additional variable to consider when you're planning your teams and your play style and such like that. Yeah, this text is all what I'm telling you about now, what I'm talking about. So talking about play styles, I won't go into detail. I've talked about these in the past seasons. In my mind, there's still basically 3 general play styles. I think as time goes on, more and more of the top players will be the high offensive max banner playstyles. A couple of GLs on defense depending on their opponents, but the goal is to one-shot every team on your opponent's side of the map for maximum banners. If you can guarantee you have an offense to do that, you don't have to spend a lot of time scouting, you don't have to spend a lot of time picking over little specific things or having very technical counters. You just know that you have teams that can beat every other team the first try. And most of the time, if you spend a little bit more time on your defense and placing creative banner stripping teams, you'll win most fights. Just mathematically, that's the best way to go. And now we're seeing in the second season of the new format, more and more of these players in the top 50s. The GAC for Crystals player, the roster bully or lower effort, lower time, it's great return on your time for crystals once you sort of reach a range where you know your 3 GLs or your 2 GLs or something. Very hard for other players to beat if you just put them all on defense. fantastic playstyle if you're just going for crystals. And then sort of somewhere in the middle is this copy the TW teams strategy, which is a mix of both. Like generally the teams and the modding guidelines from competitive guilds are good. Again, they're mostly defensive focused and not banner focused, because in TW banners don't matter. You just want to beat the opponent's team. You don't care whether it's the equivalent of like 57 banners, 58 banners, or 65 banners. Doesn't matter. You just beat them for 19 or 20 banners. So this is good, and generally you place higher in the rankings in your particular league and division. But it's again not usually a top placement. And by top, I'm saying top 10 for any players who are aiming for that level. But those are the three playstyles that I generally see in most content creators streaming or YouTube videos perspective. There are some change to what I see in playstyles that are being developed currently or growing in popularity. This one was the same in the end of season 23, where there's very few teams that are expected to hold, I guess. At lower roster depth, of course, this is a much more important criteria, where you know that if you have 3 GLs and your opponent has 2, you're probably going to guarantee a hold on one of the GLs, or you have a great chance of it. And from an offensive perspective, there are few teams who kill everything besides most GLs or Star Killer. And the stats are now starting to catch up to this, so people are able to see that in GG or other tools, OmegaBot or something like that. This is something I find sort of funny and ironic. With all the stats and numbers available, some players spend so much, especially some content creators, spend so much time scouting in great detail their opponent and build a very intricate defense. And that's great against some opponents, but against many, it doesn't really matter, because the opponent's going to change. A good opponent will change their defense. So whatever scouting you do, I mean, scouting is great against bad opponents. That was mostly in the previous format what people did. You could scout and build a complicated defense against a bad opponent that you knew would fail against your good defense against them. But good opponents, as I mentioned many times before, flexibility is king. So good opponents are going to change. They're going to have something different on defense, have something different on offense. So scouting against good opponents is sort of a waste of time. And that's something I see a lot of people waste their time on, where they're planning to beat a player who is worse than they are, assuming they have the same roster and mods and whatever. Scouting gives you an advantage over worse players. And if you focus on an offensive playstyle, you don't need to spend so much time scouting. Like, spend time building your offensive abilities and knowing that your offensive teams, each one can beat 2 or 3 possible other options. Fatal had a very interesting discussion with his community after a recent GAC match, talking about this exact concept, where the higher he's placed in the top 50, the less time he spent scouting, and the more time he spent building strong offensive teams that can take a number of defensive teams, no matter what they are. And really, I think you'll see this more and more as you try and advance in the ranks, is your performance matters more than trying to trip up your defense or trip up your opponent against your defense. Because if you're playing an equally skilled player, it's really the better offensive player that is going to win versus a more creative defense. This is not black and white. A creative defense is very important, but in terms of where you spend your time, trying to control your performance is way, way easier and more reliable than trying to control your opponent's performance. So again, this, I don't know, put it on defensive. Yeah, flexibility is king, really, that's what I'm saying. This put it on defense thing is this common whenever there's new characters, but it's more of this, these latter 2 playstyles where you just want to maintain position and get banners, then put it on defense and let your opponent struggle. That's totally viable for a position maintaining type of role. So, fleet. what is going on in Fleet? I've said this every time. It's not RNG focused. Most of this I'm talking about Executor, but it's not based on RNG. It's based on gear levels, which is speed in Fleet, and the RNG, or excuse me, the Executor mirrors are all about relative speeds and who goes first between Executor, of course, Xanadu Blood, Razor Crest, and IG-2000. So, these new ships, which there's been very little testing on so far, the new tanks for Resistance and First Order, are going to change this dynamic a lot. Not necessarily with Executor, although maybe. I have some theories and have done some very basic testing on my own that I think, I'm sure there's more on YouTube and Twitch and stuff. Like I'm no expert in the testing field, but I think it's going to change the anti-Executor comps, although I still think that's leaving too much up to RNG. Well, as I said, Resistance for Executor. This was a personal note. I didn't mean it to be in the video, but oops. And here's the thing that I still find baffling, why people put their Executor on defense when in 90+% of cases they can mirror the Executor fight for a guaranteed 68 to 74 banners. Why do you leave it up to chance? I don't understand that. Although maybe some opponents are picking this up, because I've seen in the last 2 weeks of Season 24, I saw a remarkable amount of IG-2000s on defense in the starting 3, which is specifically aimed at making the mirrors more complicated. Fascinating. It's awesome to see this. Now actually people are keeping more of their Executor of offense because it's easier, predictable banners. IG-2000 doesn't really change the calculation. Of course, you have a different playstyle if you're facing an IG-2000 mirror, but it's still very easy to beat on offense. So it's fun to see how this is sort of developing a little bit, and more people are realizing that putting your Executor on defense, we can mirror for higher banners and lower RNG, is a fool's errand. I mean, if you have an Executor and your opponent doesn't, then wonderful, great advantage. But if you both have Executors that are same star level, there's no reason to put it on defense unless you just want to, give up your GAC to a coin flip. Doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, moving on, Negotiator. So I think right now Negotiator is great on defense because a lot of people use the Malevolence to fight Executor. And you can put the Imperial TIE Bomber to sort of counter the Rebels a little bit. But I think having Resistance and First Order tanks now is going to change this whole non-Executor fleet calculation quite a bit. And if you take this up to the higher level playstyles, the top placements in GAC, you will see that when people don't place their Executor on defense, they're placing 2 non-Executor fleets. One of them will be killed by Executor. I'm assuming both Resistance and First Order fleets are going to be easily killed when Executor is on offense. So that leaves the second fleet is a very, very important one. Are either First Order or Resistance going to be good on defense with this new tank? And if so, is it going to be a rock, paper, scissors thing? Like if they put Resistance, you have to have First Order to beat it, or something like that? That's going to make Fleet so interesting. And I think Fleet is going to change format-wise in terms of where rewards are, and I think crystals are leaving Fleet Arena. But we'll see. Which is my opinion, nothing official. Character meta. What's happening this last season? An incredible growth in overall fights. Like a 30% growth in total. 4.5 million, well 4.3 million compared to last season 24, which had season 23 had 3 million battles. Almost 50%. Incredible. That's amazing. Shock to me, honestly, to be honest. That's a huge growth. I thought it'd be like 20, 30, 10, 15% growth, but no. 4.3 million versus 3 million in season 23. Amazing. There was like one extra week in there, so you can, subtract it by 7%, but still much greater growth than in season 22 to 23. Character-wise, Nest. Darth Revan Nest, anti-trooper, anti-many things except gas or another Darth Revan team. Nest can solo Iden teams, very little data, very iffy results. There's not many fights for last season, but I think we'll see this being further developed in season 25. A fascinating character. Dash and Nest on defense, very powerful if the turn order is set up correctly. Nest is definitely back. Yeah, just like relating to the other ones, a lot of anti-trooper options now, whether it's Iden always moving first, Dash being faster than Piet, Ewoks even, you can get Ewoks sort of faster than Piet for the equivalent investment of speed mods, but Piet can still kill a bunch of things, so Piet is like one of the top 3 characters I think to put your fastest speed mods, but if you can't put your fastest speed mods, don't give him mediocre mods. It depends on your roster and division and league, but Piet still is valuable to have fastest mods on, I think, because of the importance of making the most use of your investment in troopers. Off meta counters, I talked about that before. This is an interesting sort of calculation where off meta counters, if you're a defensive heavy player, are very valuable. Off meta counters, when you're trying to beat an equally skilled player with an equal sized roster, are very valuable if you place a very specific, like, that's why Sith Eternal I think has a high hold rate, high defensive value as a leader, because you can guarantee that Sith Eternal, you sort of need, I mean, everything is up in the air, but like you need Rey or SLKR, or in some cases solo Sith Eternal to beat Sith Eternal on offense. But if those players place all their GLs on defense, it's very hard to beat Sith Eternal. So you need to focus on the off-meta counters or two-shotting even sometimes. So it depends on how your opponent plays. But the off-meta counters are very available, and I think they'll become more and more valuable as you're focusing on climbing and you're facing players with more GLs but less skill or time to spend on GAC. This is what I was mentioning, the Omicron value in last episode. There's a huge amount of value from Omicrons. Don't be left behind. Make sure you're getting your Omicrons from the Galactic Challenges. If there's some marquee you want to spend money on, get it to 5 stars. I don't think many of the Omicron packs are valuable, but eventually everybody's going to have all the or will have many Omicron options. Don't neglect your GAC and TW ones, and think carefully about how the Omicrons apply to your roster and roster size. Like Akbar and Leia are awesome at lower roster sizes, 3 million, 4 million maybe. Not so great with high 6, 7, 8 million roster sizes. So think carefully about how you're going to use your Omicrons, and how they're going to expand the power of your roster. I was ranting a little bit about this streamers. Why do streamers play these weird, poor efficiency defenses? And I think it's because like playtime and more viewers, and it makes them more ad revenue or more views in general. Interesting concept that's not good for high GAC performance players, but just keep it in mind when you're thinking about what you're going to be doing. Two-shotting. I don't understand how players want to two-shot teams. It's great if you're playing another player who does the same thing. But this is a invitation to mediocrity in terms of performance, from my opinion. Playing a similar style player, if you have a better availability of two-shot options that you're comfortable with, man, that's awesome. You'll perform well. But if you're playing a player who's aiming for the top ranks, two-shotting is like an invitation to the top 500, which is, top 500 for many players is amazing. There's only 500 players. There's going to be top 500 in Kyber 1. But at the same time, you're going to sort of be stuck at that level, because an offensive player will just one-shot everything for 60 banners. is going to beat anybody's roster who's planning on two-shotting. Keep that in mind. I don't really understand it as a high performance strategy. Great from a content creator strategy because it gives you a lot more content time, but not great to plan at a high level roster size around. If you're climbing and you have 2 GLs and your opponent has 4, two-shotting is super viable. So it's a conditional thing, but I still don't get why some players do it. Last couple of things here from a character side of things. There's a huge focus on speed as an important criteria of a good roster. I would argue that having more 6E mods is more valuable than having more speed mods. I'm not saying speed mods are bad. I'm saying 6E mods would it be better, let's look at it a different way. Would it be better to have 100 6E mods and 20 plus 25 speed mods, or 150 6E mods and 10 plus 25 speed mods? I would go the 6E mod route every day of the week. That's not a great mod count, by the way, at high level rosters. But anyway, conceptually, I think 6E mods give you so many more valuable stats and allow you to spend less resources in relicking or high relicking characters compared to high speed mods. Maybe I'll go into much greater detail at a different point, but think about this when you're looking at your resource spend to excel at GAC. I think you'll find that 6E mods give you a greater bang for the buck. The resource cost is less, and it allows you to focus on developing your mod strength more than relic level of your characters. Relic level of characters is great, but it doesn't, when you have a new character, a new meta, or a new team or something, you can't take your relic characters from an old meta and shift them over. Mods, of course you can. And 6E mods especially, they amplify your new team, or a new meta team, or a new style of play, a play style, much greater than relic levels you invested into a previous team. Keep it in mind. Maybe I'll talk about it in another episode in more detail. Last thing about this last meta, last season, it's amazing how many teams are built to counter troopers. And it's possible. Look at the top 50 in Kyber 1, for example, or other leagues for sure too, but in Kyber 1, it's not uncommon to see an entire match without troopers being used. It's amazing. Troopers are one of the best bang for the buck teams, but there's so many teams now that go faster than Piet, or people are putting their Piet with their like top 15 speed mods or top 10 speed mods instead of the top 5 or top 3 speed mods. So it gives your opponent an ability, or depending again how they mod their characters, to have a bunch of teams that go faster than your troopers, especially if you put some GLs there. So I think Piet is a fascinating way to look at teams where they're trying to totally cancel out an entire offensive team's value. Very, very interesting. Last thing before I finish this 35 minutes, not as bad as some of the other episodes. Anyway, what's coming up in the future? Ships, they're going to play a huge role. Huge role, like I was talking about before. More people are keeping Executor for offense. We don't know yet how Resistance and First Order fleets are going to counter or be good on defense versus Negotiator and Malevolence fleets. That'll be fascinating to see more details and stats on. Starkiller. He's amazing. He's better than 2/3 of the other GLs on offense and defense. Like, let's look at this. Lord Vader. Let's look at the GL counters, okay? Anyway, this is Darth Revan with Nest. You need Zam, Bounty Hunters, or Gas to beat it with any regularity. Troopers are terrible. Darth Revan Nest is one of the best defensive teams you have available. Anyway, GLs and defense. I'm looking at non-GL counters here, okay? Lord Vader is the second best GL, I think. Sometimes Troopers and Chak work. Most of the time they don't. Not with Maul. It's very, very difficult to get it work with Maul. Jedi Master Kenobi. If there's Commander Ahsoka Tano, very difficult to beat. Without Commander Ahsoka Tano, you put in Gas, easy win. Or some Padme teams. Rey, look at this. 100% win rate with Starkiller. Starkiller is incredible against many comps too. But yeah, Rey, good GL, but Gas is an option. Starkiller, Gas, etc. Gas is a great offensive team. SLKR, so many options. Let's look by win rate here. Not great numbers, but there's a lot of options. JKR, even Veers has a great win rate when they put Night Sisters with it. But generally, JKR, Starkiller, Veers can beat most of the SLKR teams. JML is decent, again, but even with an amazing team, not great versus Gas. GG can do a great job on him. Depends on the setup, obviously. And then Sith Eternal is one of the, as we saw before, one of the best GLs on defense overall, statistics-wise. But GG Newt, it's different if you put the DR trio with him, or the Treo trio, which takes GG Newt down to less than 50%, so not really reliable. But there's a lot of non-GL counters to GLs that people are still learning in the process of learning. Let's see here. Omicrons. Yeah, don't get left behind with Omicrons. There's a lot of them. There'll always be more. But it looks like every third or fourth Omicron is meta-defining. So save up yours. Have them ready. Some for TW to get more wins for your team, for your guild. But don't forget the GAC ones. I think after we have these, the Resistance ship is farmable now, then we'll have First Order afterwards. And I think then potentially the Ravager, the rumored Ravager that's coming for the Sith fleet, with perhaps a tank for the Sith fleet. I don't know, we have the B-28, so maybe not. But then we'll have 5 non-executor fleets that are very highly competitive, that are available at different levels of the gameplay. So I think it's very likely then, at that point, they're going to change the fleet arena to take crystals away and put them into GAC in some stage, and maybe have 3 fleets in GAC, or 2 zones, or change the map. And just plan on this in the next 6 months. Make sure you don't get left behind in fleet. What's my last point for upcoming future GAC meta? Ships, which I've talked about in half of the future. So don't forget ships. Don't play the stupid trade RNG executor mirrors in GAC. You're not going to develop a skill that is going to benefit you well in future GAC metas, and definitely not in placing highly in your league and division. Focus on having a great offense and changing up your defense frequently. I think that's the best way to increase your performance and make you actually a better player, in my opinion. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this only 40-minute episode. I hope you're looking forward to this upcoming season of GAC. Good luck, have fun, and I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Cheers.